theme of our Bible study series that's going to be going forward from here. Bold, strong, and courageous. And what we're going to be doing is looking at the lives and the stories of biblical characters. And we're going to take their boldness and their courage and their strength, and we're going to kind of pick it apart and analyze it a little bit. And then we're going to apply it to ourselves and see where it falls and how it might change our perspective on things. So I'm looking at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego from Daniel 3 tonight. Next week, if we are not done with this, next lesson will probably be Daniel 6, Daniel in the lion's den. I'm looking at maybe doing Jonah in hostile Nineveh. Jonah being sent to Nineveh the analogy has been made that it would be like sending a Jew into Nazi Germany to proclaim Judaism. I'm looking at the Apostle Paul from chapter 18, where he basically is being told by God, don't worry, I have people, I got your back. Moses before Pharaoh, considering that Pharaoh could have just very easily had him dispatched into the great beyond. I'm looking at Paul in Corinth, which took some moxie. I'm thinking about maybe looking at Esther and Haman, the story of Esther. So we've got a lot that we could take a look at here, but tonight we're going to be looking at Martin Luther. That would be another one that faced great adversity, and he was bold, strong, and courageous throughout the whole process. At least he gave a good public persona of it, and he did. So this is where we're going to start tonight. A little quote from Martin Luther, taken from Luther's Works, my abbreviated compendium, so I didn't spend all of my research time looking for Luther quotes. He wrote right here, "It is, of course, the nature of our flesh and blood to be courageous and cheerful as long as there is no suffering and sorrow. I am, as the proverb puts it, not afraid of 10 when I am alone. But when the weather changes and temptation and trouble come upon us and oppress us, then we have lost the precious promises and the comforting thoughts vanish as if Christ had never spoken any promise or had left us no comfort whatever." So that's basically where we're going to be going. We're going to kind of be digging into what is the makeup of a disciple of Christ that is showing boldness and courage and strength. So this one's going to be called Fireproof Faith, and the Isaiah 43 passage kind of fits this to a T. Isaiah wrote, "When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze," which is not a literal promise that you are supposed to now go out and fire up the Barbie and walk through it and think that you're not going to get third-degree burns on your body, because you will. But it is talking spiritually here. So back in 2009, there was an arson that hit St. John's Lutheran Church, one of our churches in Wetaskiwin, Alberta. And it started in the cry room, and it essentially moved up into the rest of the church, and it left everything, the entire interior, black, like a worm that makes its way through your apple, and the black trail that it leaves. This thing was so hot that it curled the keys on the organ so that they looked like curled up nails or arthritic fingers that were charred so badly. It was just a disaster. And then they were almost a year and a quarter in discussions with their insurance company because they had not paid enough premium, or they had not stayed up on their insurance policy to be able to get full replacement value. So they took what they could, and they worked very closely with a contractor. And I was blessed to be able to preach their installation of the new church, opening of the new church sermon for them, as well as Canada Pres a few years ago. So it's a wonderful facility now. But, it kind of led me to believe, as a segue into this fireproof faith, what do you need to do in order to fireproof a church? You know, I mean, do you build it all of steel and concrete? Do you have concrete benches? What are you going to do for hymnals? Are we going to go back to clay tablets? If we go back to clay tablets, you're going to have probably about 900 or so tablets that you're going to have to use for a Bible, let alone for a hymnal. Where are you going to fit 900 clay tablets per person? Although I guess COVID wouldn't live on clay tablets as much as the paper that had to be taken out. So that might be one advantage. But organs, I mean, things like that, there are just some things in a church that you just cannot fireproof. It's just not possible. So I'm just kind of wondering, as maybe a lame segue, but just a segue nonetheless, have you ever thought about this in connection with your faith? Have you ever wondered whether your faith is going to be able to withstand that major disaster that rolls into your life? The cancer diagnosis of you or your spouse. God forbid, the death of a child before the parent, or the death of a parent. Are you going to be able to face that crisis? Are you going to be able to face the crisis of a worldly pandemic? Is your faith going to be able to stand up to this? These are questions that we all ask ourselves, and these are questions that I don't know if Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego actually gave much thought to when they were when their faith was facing a life-altering crisis. But that's what we're going to look at today. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, three friends of Daniel who were taken off into Babylon in about 605 BC, and they faced a decree that you either bend your knee to the idol that I have created, or you were going to lose your life. So I'm just wondering, how did these friends, these three guys, keep their cool? And how did they have such a fireproof faith that kept them so strong and bold in the Lord? That's kind of what we're going to be looking at tonight as we walk through here. Excuse me. So, there is Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and a fourth one that looks as though he is a son of the gods. And not all the graphics are up to my picky standards tonight, but it's the content, I guess, that we're going for. So, okay, so let's take a look at the text. If you have a Bible handy, I did not put it in the handout. That is my faux pas, but I was so hurried to get this thing pulled together. But I'm going to read it to you slowly. But if you do have a Bible, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, Daniel. We're going to take a look at chapter 3. We're going to look at the first 7 verses. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide, and he set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. He then summoned the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image that he had set up. So, the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "Nations and peoples of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace." Therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, and all kinds of music, all the nations and peoples of every language fell down and worshiped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Okay. So let's give you some bearing, some idea. We're going to give you a little history in here as well, just to kind of round out this study a little bit. There is the Statue of Liberty. The Statue of Liberty, from the bottom of its foot to the top of the highest crown of her head, is 111 feet. King Nebuchadnezzar's 60 cubits and 6 cubits wide would have been about 90 feet tall and about 9 feet diameter at the base. So it would have made it very tall and skinny and very susceptible to being bowled over. So some have suggested that perhaps King Nebuchadnezzar's entire statue also stood on a base similar to the Statue of Liberty, and that was considered part of the 60 cubits. The entire Statue of Liberty, from top to the bottom of its base, is about 305 feet. So, but that gives you some comparison. So the Statue of Liberty, if you've ever been to New York, that would still be 21 feet taller than King Nebuchadnezzar's golden idol. To give you some other point of reference, here is one of the Afghanistan Buddhas at, where was it? It was Bamiyan in Central Africa and Afghanistan. And this is one of them that the you call the Taliban blew up as an idol in 2001. So some have thought that perhaps his idol was not freestanding, but it was still 9 feet in diameter, but it was actually carved into the wall of one of the fortress or the city wall in Babylon. So we're not really sure. We kind of get the picture that maybe it's standing on its own, but freestanding, but we don't know for sure. I mean, because that's a pretty unwieldy statue, 90 feet tall and only 9 feet diameter at the base. So that'll give you some reference right there for that. So the convocation, the reason for calling this together, not really sure, but I'm going to read you a quote from Steinman, who wrote the Concordia Publishing House commentary on Daniel. He said the convocation to Nebuchadnezzar's gold statue may have been in connection with a rebellion in Babylon that Nebuchadnezzar put down in December 595 BC through January of 594 BC. So only literally 2 months. We have a year change, but it's 2 months. Nebuchadnezzar gathered all his vassals to have them swear allegiance. This may have even included King Zedekiah of Judah. Was this allegiance ceremony the occasion of the golden statue? Some commentators think so. If so, that would put the date for Daniel chapter 3 at December 594 or January 593, which would be a year after the quelling of the rebellion. You'd have a year later, haha, we're victorious type of party. So that's from Pastor Steinman. That's one suggestion there. So I've got a little homework for you, and this is going to only take up 60 seconds of your time, and it's not intended to waste time, but Nebuchadnezzar, your first question, Nebuchadnezzar ordered his provincial leaders to bow down to a golden idol that he had built to show their loyalty and allegiance. List at least 2 other times in the history of the world that similar orders were given, okay? So I'm going to give you 60 seconds to try to come up with at least 2 other times in the history of the world when similar orders of having to bend your knee in allegiance to some other idol or some other foreign power was the case for Christians. There you go. Okay, your time is up. I forgot to turn on one little switch for the sound, so it would actually come through your computer. So you might have heard a little bit of a soundtrack there, but in any event, I'm not going to back out and set it up again now. So did anybody have any sort of idea of at least two other incidents in history where Christians were actually asked to show their loyalty and allegiance to an idol or another power? Anyone?
Oh, the Roman emperor, for one.
Absolutely, Murray. Thank you very much. There's my first example right there. And that would be 2nd century AD Rome, where Christians were considered to be atheists, non-godly. And they are considered that they would not bend their knee to the gods of the pantheon. And especially, they would not bend their knee to the god that was Caesar. So they just were immediately on the outs. They didn't participate in any of the social or civic activities around those pagan pantheon of God celebrations. They were very careful not to give any impression that they would bend their knee to the Caesar who had taken on the role of being a god. So they were considered to be unpatriotic citizens. And that would probably not change until the time of Constantine, almost 100 years later. So anyone else have another time in history? And admittedly, this one is a little obscure, but you have surprised me in the past. So I'm giving you the opportunity to surprise me again with a second situation. This one.
Probably not what you were thinking.
That's okay. Go ahead.
But I would say some of our current national evangelists.
Can you explain more?
Mm,
Because I'm not even sure if I'm tracking with you, even though you're speaking in code.
How can I say this? In some of our missions, some of our national evangelists are hauled in on a monthly basis.
Yeah.
How's that? Without going into further detail. So it's not ancient history, it's current history.
Current history in China.
It's
Yeah.
current history in China. It's current history in other countries.
Absolutely.
Where we have evangelists that Christianity has been legalized, but it is illegal to proselytize even your children or to pray with your children. So the country that I'm thinking of, this national evangelist is getting hauled in on a pretty regular basis to be checked up on as to what his activities have been. So he's already run into trouble with the law for having dinner prayers with his children, which is against the law because you cannot proselytize even your children. It's not considered raising them in the faith. It's considered proselytizing them. So yeah, I think we can release.
There are Islamic countries that it's happening in right now, Pastor.
Yeah, right. A lot of countries.
Iran, for example.
Yeah.
Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
Pakistan.
The second one that I had, and I know it's a little obtuse, but only Pastor Dan Haben, would be able to have such an obtuse example. It's called fumia. It means stepping on a picture. And we're talking the years of 1629 to 1856. And basically Christianity had been outlawed. And if you were suspected of being a Christian, you had the opportunity to separate or distance yourself from the Christian faith by stepping on a picture or a cast impression of Jesus on the cross or the Mother Mary. And if you would step on the picture of your Savior or the Mother Mary, then you would spare your life. Your life would be spared. If not, if you refuse to do that, then you would be killed in the most gruesome possible way that the officers could find to make a public spectacle of you. And it only was in 1856 that this officially changed, and that's when Japan opened up again to Western trading. But this practice still continued unofficially in other parts of Japan until Christian missionaries were able to get themselves out into the rest of the country. So, yeah, this is real life history here. Now, if you are at all interested in historical fiction around such a topic, there is an author by the name of Shusaku Endo, and he wrote a book called Silence, and this might even be a film by now. But this is something that you could pursue if you're interested in such things. So, but moving back to our Bible study.
Actually, can I chime one thing in, Pastor?
Go right ahead, Mike.
There's a flip side of the idolatry that we never talk about, but unfortunately with the church history, sometimes it's the Christian church using its own man-made version of legalism, if you will, as an idol, and anybody that doesn't chime or bow to that, and they really enforce it and make you and will kill you, that's probably partly what Luther was facing, was that type of idolatry. So that too, unfortunately, the Christian church has quite a history of not so good as well, pushing people to bow to their idols.
Yeah, and you have to differentiate between the idol in the classic sense and what you're calling an idol. What they would come back at you, Mike, by saying, "No, we're not making this an idol. This is God's doctrine and our interpretation." You know what I'm saying? That's what they would say to you. Yeah.
I know they would say that, but there were also Pharisees who hung Jesus on a cross as a heretic as well. So I mean,
yeah, no, I get you.
I'm sticking with the be hung on the cross, but then the people doing it.
Yeah. No, your point is well taken. Well, I was not going to go down this road, because if I have too many rabbit holes, then we just have a big giant rabbit hole for a Bible class, and we have to put all the rabbit holes back together again. But I mean, the lapse of the persecution of the 2nd and 3rd century, the church had quite. So you're asked to renounce your faith in Jesus and commit your faith to Rome and to Caesar and to Pantheon. Otherwise, we're going to kill you. So people would obviously cave, right? And the people that caved were called the lapsi. They lapsed in their judgment. They lapsed in the strength of their faith. But then, after the time of persecution was over, we'll take Nero, for example, they came back to the church and they said, we want to come back in the church. And this was a great consternation. This was a great hubbub of discussion. Do we let them back into the church or not? And there was one group that said, absolutely not. They renounced their faith. They're traitors to Jesus. And then there was the other side that said, look, brothers, Jesus died for every single sin, and they were repentant. It's incumbent upon us to bring them back into the church. So that's another example that's related to this whole renouncing your faith with the Fumiya, like in Japan. So anyway. All right, back to our Bible study. After Daniel interpreted Nebuchadnezzar's dream in Daniel 2, the Babylonian king exclaimed, surely your God is the God of gods. Daniel 2, middle of the chapter. However, Nebuchadnezzar continued to worship false gods. What was worse, he was now giving his God-given authority to turn other people away from the true God. So what are some ways that we might be guilty of turning others away from God? How can we apply Nebuchadnezzar's actions to ourselves and give that some thought? And this one, I'm not giving you 60 seconds to contemplate. I'm just saying you can hit your space bar and unmute, and you can just throw out a possible idea. I've got maybe 3 or 4 of them here for you that I can suggest, but what do you think?
Pastor,
Mm-hmm.
it's Heather.
Go ahead, Heather.
I think when people really get on people and they stay on people and they're not patient or gentle and too aggressive, that can push them away. You have to know when to say and when to stop and when to start again.
Yeah, that takes sanctified wisdom, doesn't it? Yeah. What else? That's a good one, Heather. Thank you. Who else has got a thought? What are some ways that you and I might be guilty of turning others away from God? Or what are some ways that some people have turned you off and turned you away from God? Thoughts?
Pastor, it's Mika.
Hi, Mika.
Hi. I think when we speak the word of God but act contrary to the word of God, that says a lot about us and it turns people off.
That was a number 1 on my list, was hypocrisy. And I'll just flip to it. And I think where we have particularly have that danger is in our own homes. You know, if you look at the shadow behind the actual couple, that you can see is the inference of what you say and what you do are absolutely 2 different things. And if you have children in the house, they're witness to these things, you know. But that's the number 1. I think that's the number 1 accusation hurled against Christians and Christianity, is that they're just a bunch of hypocrites. And you try as you might to be able to turn that into, yes, the Christian church is a hospital for sinners, which is true. That often does not placate what these folks have kind of made up in their minds. So, what do you
Also, lack of
go ahead, Mike.
lack of humility and holier than thou attitude.
Yeah, I'm not sure I built that into. No, I didn't build that into any one of my 4, but I think that is not patterning yourself after Jesus, right? Who else has got another one?
Pastor, it's Fran.
Yeah, Fran.
I think a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about in your other Bible study about misinterpreting or misreading a lot of the Bible to take it to mean that we have on the earth protection as opposed to spiritual protection from anything that might be evil. And the whole thing, or harmful, and the whole sort of premise of that is that, you know, like in the book Case for Faith, a lot of folks talking that when they could no longer reconcile why so many bad things were happening to good people, quote unquote, you know, and how much anger and pain and hurt and suffering and dying there was in the world. They turned away from God because it was hard to reconcile that with what they were being told was God's plan for humanity.
Yeah. And I read a study, I was going to say not too long ago, but it's probably been 15 or 18 years now, that folks that fall into that scenario with a broad brush, but that the facts really kind of bore it out in the survey that was done for the paper. Parental involvement in the raising of their children and the consistency that the children see is actually being lived out by mom and dad. Those questions don't arise later in life for those children. Why do bad things happen to good people? Because they've been raised to see that bad things happen to good people in the Bible all the time, and who ultimately at the end bailed them out or brought them home to heaven, you know, and they were able to have those conversations with their parents. So that kind of dealt, and isn't that funny? Isn't that ironic, I should say? That's just the biblical model for raising children, you know. This is the test ground for preparing them for life outside of the safety net of the family that God created for them. So it just puts an importance on the role of parental involvement in the raising of children. which I didn't necessarily do such a great job of. Thanks God my wife did, so.
Pastor, I support that, and I agree with that. I just would note that one of the primary characters in that book, that Case for Faith, and first one who has found it difficult to hold on to his faith in Christ was Billy Graham's partner in terms of starting that ministry.
Yeah.
So in that case, he would not be a case in point of that. He would be someone as an adult who, for whatever reason, turned away because he couldn't reconcile with his own, in his own heart, what was going on. So I think we don't really understand why that happens. But I'm just saying is that when we see that, I'm covered in God's blood, but I still got COVID kind of story that we've talked about lately can also be a good reason why people lean on a false promise and then walk away when that promise isn't unfolding in the way they expected it to.
Well, absolutely. That can just destroy faith, have a long-term negative effect on a person's relationship with their Savior. So, yeah, I don't know if, I think there's way too many shepherds out there. This does not address the first guy, but this definitely addresses your second example. There's way too many shepherds out there that like the glitz and the fun of being a pastor or a shepherd of God's people or a reverend, but I don't know if they necessarily have had it beat into their heads the responsibility that comes along with the turf, with the vocation. And he's going to be accountable to God. When for having spoken those words. COVID, the blood of Christ, I'm covered, nothing can happen to me. All just a really one bad syllogism. So anyway, I'm going to share with a couple, we all have our moments, but whatever fills the heart, the mouth speaks. So this is really just hypocrisy B for the Christian. Gossip, boy, I don't know if men or women are more predisposed to gossip. I think women stereotypically have been painted with being the gossiping ones, the murmuring ones, which is why in Eastern culture, women aren't trusted and that's why they're not given any authority, because historically they've been considered to not have the intellectual prowess to be able to fathom in a man's world and fathom in man's depths, because they supposedly are more inclined to gossip. But hey, I know plenty of guys that just love to tell stories about this guy and that guy. So, or complaining. Complaining is another one. If you know that God is in control of the weather, why are we complaining about it? I don't get that, It's so darn cold right now, Pastor. I can't wait till summer gets here. And then summer gets here and the Lord gives us some nice 40-degree days. And it's just so hot. I can't wait till fall gets here. And then fall gets here and it's rainy. It's just one thing after another. So anyway, be content with what the Lord has given to you. The last one that I came up with, and I know it's a blurry, bad quality picture, but I thought it was a good example, poor or unethical work habits. And that's just a subcategory of hypocrisy, isn't it? You say that you're working for Christ and that you want to give glory to his name and that everything you do in your vocation is going to bring glory to his name. But then you just do shoddy work. So anyway, those are just some things that I was trying to get this to break up this otherwise monologue or preaching type Bible study, get you a little bit involved. One little...
I think all of those fall under the category of Christians acting poorly. And I think there's nothing that people like to grasp onto than Christians acting poorly. That turns them away from even wanting to hear the gospel or hearing the love of God. It just completely turns them off.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, and all of those things that you listed, Pastor, certainly fall under that category.
Well, and I think... Go ahead.
Sorry,
Mike, is that you?
I wanted to chime one more on top of what Karen said. Is that not what the third commandment is really saying when it says, thou shalt not take the Lord's name in vain? when we become the bride of Christ, what does the bride do? The bride takes the name of the one they're marrying. So we bear the name of God or bear the name of Christ by being a Christian, and then we don't act in accordance with how we're expected to behave. We dishonor the name for which we've taken or which we call ourselves, and everybody's watching our behavior to see, are we really, is this what Christ is all about? Or so.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point, Michael. Absolutely it is. And I think that whenever we do anything that separates a person from their maker and their creator by our actions or our words, I would hope that someone would bring that to my attention and point it out to me if I ever did that, because that's just an offense, a grievous offense of the worst kind. So thank you for that point. I just raised up my laptop just a little bit so you're not looking up or down at me. Hopefully I'm still in the picture. I'm not seeing myself, but and I guess that reminds me that we could take an extra 15 seconds to bring up the topic of social media too, because there's a perfect example where people know whether or not you are a Christian or not, and what's going on in your Facebook account. And the reason I mention this is I'm not accusing any of you of anything, because I don't have a Facebook account and I have absolutely no interest of wanting to have a Facebook account. Well, I have one so that I can easily log into Zoom. Okay, but I don't go on Facebook and monitor it. But that definitely has a bearing on the quality of a person's relationship or the lack thereof with potentially with their Savior. And I'm thinking particularly of a pastor in our church body that one of our members wrote to me and said, listen, what do you think I ought to do about this guy? Because he's posting all of his political viewpoints on his pastor's blog. And I said, I think you need to call him out on it. It's public. You need to call him out. I honestly believe that, and Pastor Thompson and I have spoken about this, and unless he's changed his attitude in the last 30 seconds, well, the last 3 hours since I saw him, which he perfectly can, but I honestly don't believe that a pastor has any business whatsoever making his political views known in the official office and capacity of his office that he bears on behalf of his people. It's called the public ministry for a reason. It's not a personal ministry. It's a public ministry because I represent all the people of St. Paul, and I serve them publicly on their behalf, both conservatives and liberals and NDPers and Green Party people. I have absolutely no interest in taking sides on a political spectrum because it could turn off everyone who's on the opposite political spectrum. I mean, I'm here for another kingdom. I'm here to represent another kingdom, the kingdom of heaven, not some earthly kingdom. So I think that's another aspect. The pastors, they have absolutely no business bringing politics into the pulpit. I really don't, unless all of a sudden they're going to start attacking the Christian faith. But that's not a political thing. That's a government action. Do you see the distinction? So anyway, that's my 2 cents worth. I'm not happy when I hear about pastors having to vent their personal political views on these things. So, okay, we're into 8 to 18. And if you want to turn to your Bible, I'm going to take a look at the next section where we actually start now getting into the heart of this whole thing. So here we go. At this time, some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "May the king live forever. Your majesty has issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music must fall down and worship the image of gold, and that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to your majesty. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of God you have set up." Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up?" Now, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, this is awesome, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of God you have set up. That is probably one of the most polite, belligerent statements I have ever heard. Not belligerent, it's belligerent to King Nebuchadnezzar would view it as belligerent, but what a polite confession of faith. It's absolutely awesome. All right, so what have I got here for you? So who are these three amigos? Well, I'm just going to roll back to chapter 1 just to give you a little bit of a setting here, just so you know who Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are, because you're going to need to know that for another example that I'm going to use later on. So the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility, young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that, they were to enter the king's service. So they were supposed to enter into the social service of their country. Here's the point. Among those who were chosen were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief official gave them new names. To Daniel, the name Belshazzar. To Hananiah, Shadrach. To Mishael, Meshach. And to Azariah, Abednego. So that's who these guys are. 4 of them get taken over to Babylon before the 586 fall of the city of Jerusalem. They're over in Babylon about 10, 11 years earlier. 9 years earlier. And 605, and they are already being taken into the service of the Babylonians. So our third question that we've got going on here is, why would the astrologers have had good reason not to tattle on Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Well, that would mean that you'd have to remember what happened in chapter 2. So if you have your Bible open and you look at chapter 2, what's going on there? Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. He wants his astrologers and his wise men to translate this dream, or it gets to the point where he finally threatens that he's going to have all the astrologers and all of the wise men dispatched into the world beyond. So they have every reason to thank Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego for being able to pray to their God, and then God comes to Daniel in a dream during the night and is able to explain this. So they have every reason to thank these guys, but obviously they grew jealous, and this jealousy motivated them to set up some sort of trap for them, because they knew that they were religious guys, and they had it out for these 4 men. Probably a good reminder that just because what you've done right, you've done something well and done something godly. That doesn't necessarily mean that your opponents, or there aren't going to be opponents to your success in that situation, and they might actually come after you out of jealousy. Here's probably a classic example of that. So, but the point in all of this would be the reminder that God is still in control. We're going to see that God is going to be supernaturally in control for these men The question comes up, if these three amigos, where's the fourth amigo? Where is Daniel in all of this? And quite honestly, we have nothing to tell us from the Bible where Daniel is in any of this. It's speculation to say perhaps Daniel was in such a high position of the government that he was exempt from this public display of allegiance to Nebuchadnezzar and to this golden idol. Perhaps because Daniel had been promoted to such a high level in the government, maybe he was out of the country on official state business. Maybe Daniel was ill and he was exempt from all of this. We honestly don't know. And then there is the accusation, excuse me, that this story was somehow invented. It's all fiction, and there's no possible way that any of this could possibly be real. It's striking that the chief player of the book of Daniel is actually missing from such a dramatic story in the book of his namesake, of his name. So, but there's accusations of that from unbelievers all the time, that these stories are just too fantastical in the Bible, and this thing could never have happened. So, but they just don't believe in the supernatural. So, but here's a question 3 for you. I'm going to give you another 60 seconds. Why would the astrologers have had good reason not to tattle on Shad? Oh, I'm past that. I want to go to the next one. I want to go to number 4.
Could I mention something before we move to
Mike?
that? Yeah. So I also noticed in the footnotes that for astrologers, you could also use the word Chaldeans, which is interesting because the name has connotations. And the theme of Babylon and Chaldea, it appears throughout Scripture from Genesis all the way through Revelation. And there's a theme of, like in Genesis, I think it's 15, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Ur, of the land of the Chaldeans. So there's a theme of being pulled out from the materialistic world because Chaldea, Babylon, is synonymous with the materialistic world or the spiritless world, or no godliness. Let's put it that way, the absence of God.
Right.
So, and it says that at this time some Chaldeans came forward and denounced the Jews, all the Jews.
Yeah.
Then they used Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego as the example to try to tar all of them, even though, as far as anybody could see, 3 guys are not bowing, but they want all of them. And that's a theme that came up in Esther and elsewhere too. This is a common theme all throughout. And again, this is also playing against the theme that because the Jews had refused to obey the Lord, now he has sent them to where they wanted to go, to the ultimate, to Babylon. So now they really are in Babylon under this rule. But it's a play in these themes of, you want to be ungodly, well, now you're going to serve these people. And so now they're being forced to choose, do we really serve these people or do we really serve God? Because yeah, you're getting what you asked for is essentially what you're saying. Yeah, good point. Question 4. Here we go. I already answered that. This is the question I want you to spend some time on. What time are we at? We've got about 6 minutes, so good. The king threatened Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego with death by burning if they didn't bow before his idol. How might the 3 have justified obedience to the king's command? You go ahead and start thinking about that. I'll be right back.
All right, time. So, how might the three have justified obedience to the king's command so they could just get back on with life and they didn't have to face some sort of torturous ending? Thoughts?
Do not fear those. Well, of course, I'm jumping ahead of the story because I know the end. But I would say, do not fear those who can harm the body. Fear the one who can has the power to throw you into hell.
Yeah, that's one of the slides that I'm going to bring up here in a little bit. But yeah, absolutely, Michael. But what could they have rationalized in their brains to say, oh, we could probably just go ahead and do this and make Nebuchadnezzar happy with us? Because ultimately, what could they say to themselves inside?
Pastor, I can pick a half a dozen things for you. I don't really believe I can do it and close my eyes and just sort of, suck back whatever I'm feeling about it. God knows my heart.
Yeah.
The moment I walk away from this, I will beg his forgiveness, and it's just a pragmatic thing. I mean, it may sound stupid, but it's the kind of conversations that some of us, at least myself, I've had with myself when faced with, if somebody said to me, I'm going to kill your child if you don't do something that and your faith is an element of that. I honestly don't know how I'd respond. And that's part of the thinking that went through my head. How far would I be prepared to lie or deceive myself or rationalize behavior to save something else I valued?
Right. Yep. Yeah, big philosophical questions that we save for Pastor Thompson to guide us through. Here's one of them. You could just go through the actions of the worship. Ultimately, all he wants me to do is bend my knee, bow to this idol, and he can't control what's inside my head and my heart, and I don't really mean it. I'm thinking of the Old Testament soldier, Naaman. Naaman went back and did the same thing, and Elisha.
But in Naaman's case, Pastor, he actually asked forgiveness beforehand because
He did.
he asked for permission effectively to do that
Right.
because he knew he would be in that situation. Right.
Exactly. Yeah. But similar, they would know the story and they could probably rationalize the same thing in their heads, I suppose. They could ask for forgiveness from each other, theoretically. Obviously, they did not, given their bold response. And then the other thing that they could just say to themselves is one of the variations that Fran just mentioned is you got to do what you got to do to stay alive. So I'm gonna bend my knee and do this. All right. So where we're probably going to lead to here is question 5, and then unfortunately we'll have to save the conclusion of this study for next week. But maybe that's not such a bad thing. Finish this sentence. With their brave response, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego demonstrate that there is a higher goal in life than staying alive. That goal is what? And I won't give you 60 seconds to figure it out. Just shout it out if you have.
Staying faithful to your God.
Staying faithful to your God. Yep. That's ultimately where I was going with this, to glorify God. That's ultimately the goal. And that's what these 3 men were doing in this situation. They were not going to compromise and just bend down and say, well, we'll just go through the motions, because God's going to know what's in their heart, yes. But when it comes to dictates upon the pure religion, you have to be very careful about what your actions portray. Your walk has to match your talk very closely. So, all right, I'm going to pause there. I'm just taking a look at where this leads to. No, I'm going to pause here and just ask you, we're just getting into the good stuff, but that's all right. There's some history here that we needed to kind of resurrect this story, so that's okay. Any questions that I have from any of you before we depart for the evening and reconvene next week? Thoughts, Questions? All right. Well,
Pastor, it's Mika.
Mika.
Yes, I just want to mention, because you brought up the book of silence earlier in this session, and I haven't read the book, but Mike and I have seen the movie, and it definitely demonstrates very well this whole thing of just apostatize. Doesn't mean anything, and it really brings that out, and the conflict that the priests go through with that. So it's definitely a worthwhile movie if nobody's seen it. I'm sure the book is really good too, but I haven't read it.
Well, just a little synopsis I read about it as I was getting ready for this Bible class the last 2 days. It looked absolutely intriguing. And quite honestly, it looks a little bit more intense than I almost need to take a vacation first, so I'm re-energized because it sounds very intense. I don't know if I would find it relaxing to watch such a moral dilemma like that. So, all right, with that, I will bow out. And there was Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. There was in the intertestamental period. Oh, yeah, that's right. I forgot about this little passage that I popped in here. And let me just get my little window out of the way. In view of God's mercy, offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. That's Romans 12, 1-2. I hope it's coming through clearly on your screens. But that might be one of those verses, that you want to just jot down on the side of your Bible study here. And it gets transferred to a 3x5 recipe card or a Post-it note and makes its way to your refrigerator door. It's a good passage to remind us that the whole purpose of our life is to live it to the glory of God. So, okay, I move on. Yes, now to the intertestamental period. In the intertestamental period, which is the time from about 400 BC to 0, someone wrote a prayer of Azariah. And remember, Azariah was Abednego's Jewish name before he received the Babylonian name from the court official when they first got over there. And they understood this point very clearly about living your entire life to the glory of God, because they wrote this prayer that reiterates the same truths that we've just been talking about here in these slides, and they ascribe it to Azariah as he walked around the furnace. And here's just a little excerpt from it right here. So it picks up, at this time, there is no prince or prophet or leader, no burnt offering or sacrifice or oblation or incense, no place to make an offering before thee or to find mercy. Yet with a contrite heart and a humble spirit, may we be accepted, as though it were with burnt offerings of rams and bulls. And may we wholly follow thee, for there will be no shame for those who trust in thee. Deal with us in thy forbearance and in thy abundant mercy. Deliver us in accordance with thy marvelous works, and give glory to thy name, O Lord. Let them know that thou art the Lord, the only God, glorious over the whole world. So while it's not inspired, I just thought it was kind of neat when I found it that someone actually thought enough of Azariah's legacy, Abednego's legacy, to put your very life on the line. And then to actually put enough creative energy into thinking, what would those three guys be thinking as they were walking around in the flames, marveling at the fact that they're not being consumed? And then all of a sudden there's a fourth one along with them who is like the Son of Man. I thought it was pretty good theological creativity to come up with this idea of, I'm going to compose a prayer that maybe Azariah would have been praying as he was inside the fiery furnace, or not bending his knee to Nebuchadnezzar. So I just thought I'd share that with you. This next slide is from Pastor John Jeske, who eventually became Professor John Jeske, the Old Testament professor at Wisconsin Lutheran Seminary. There's a sketch of him in his older days. in his elderly retired years. But Pastor John Jeske also has the connection of this was Karen Small Goetzinger's pastor at one time at St. John's Root Creek on 68th and Forest Home in Milwaukee. And if you ever have had the privilege and pleasure of being able to ever read, or better yet, hear one of Professor Jeske's sermons, he was absolutely amazing preacher and quite the wordsmith. So, you know, Mark Jeske, his son from Time of Grace, very easily picked up his father's gift of preaching. So they're both equally talented and gifted preachers. However, back to this point, the three amigos here, they had absolutely no idea how refusing the king would turn out for them. But that was really for them beside the point. Now, I've got this short extract here that kind of summarizes, which you probably have read over 3 times already. But I would really rather share with you the longer section that this extract was pulled from. And it's only 4 short paragraphs. But let me just share with you Professor Jeske's thoughts on the 3 amigos as they're being threatened, or they're making their confession of faith, I should say, before Nebuchadnezzar. Professor Jeske wrote, "There must have been many who bowed down that day only from the instinct of self-preservation. You do what you have to do to stay alive. After all, isn't that the most important thing in life, staying alive? But there were 3 men in the plain of Dura that day who were convinced there is a higher goal in life than staying alive. And those 3 remained standing when everyone else around them was bowed to the ground. The 3 could have argued that Nebuchadnezzar wasn't asking for a permanent change in their belief system, just a few minutes of their time. Plus, they didn't have to be convinced of the truth of what they were doing. And God would understand, wouldn't he? What good would they be to him dead? But they didn't argue this way because they knew that the goal of life was not to stay alive, but to glorify God. Nor did the 3 men dare to suggest to God how this matter was finally to come out. They had no promise of a special miracle, and neither did they ask for one or expect one. They knew God would help them, continue to hold them by the hand, and lead them to their ultimate destination at his side. If God did not intervene to save them, well, that was his business. Their business was to be loyal to him and to put God first in their lives. They knew that Jehovah is a God of absolute constancy. His love is loyal, it's steady, and his children can rely on it. But Jehovah is also a God of absolute independence. He does as he pleases with the powers of heaven and the people of the earth. God cannot be forced or coaxed, even by our faithfulness and obedience. His mercy is free. It acts as God wills." So there's a little extract for you. And again, if you want a copy of that, just let me know by email or text, and I will print off these slides for you so that you can have just a little bit fuller supplement or addendum to your worksheets. So yes, Professor Jeske is quite the insightful theologian. I very much appreciate having known the man. But those are his thoughts. He basically summarizes that for these guys, the 3 amigos, they're just right there, up there on the top of the shelf as spiritual mentors to have, as far as putting God number 1, first commandment issue lived out right there. So, okay, now we are into the part of the excitement is about to happen now. And so this is where we're going to take a look at Daniel chapter 3, 19 to 30. I forgot to remind you to pull your Bibles out at the beginning of class, and I hope you did, but I'm going to read through it for us right after a little sip of coffee here. And one of Karen's fisherman friends, don't tell her I borrowed it. Okay, here we go. Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude toward them changed. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing the robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent and the furnace so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, "Weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire?" They replied, "Certainly, Your Majesty." He said, "Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods." Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps, prefects, governors, and royal advisors crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair of their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces and their houses be turned into piles of rubble, for no other God can save in this way." Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Okay, so there's our text that we're going to take a look at. And
Can I interrupt you for 1 second, Pastor?
pardon, Mike?
I just wanted to add one little thing because I've always noticed this in my Bible, but I guess the Hebrew Bible continues into Daniel 4 for the first 3 verses as the end of that chapter. So anytime I read it, I always include those, just me, but I always add those other 3 verses in because it reinforces Nebuchadnezzar's acknowledging God as the true God. It's one of the times that he does it. So I always find it interesting that Daniel 4 starts with that, but it's not connected to anything. It's like this man who's a total pagan suddenly decrees this, where it makes way more sense why he's decreeing it. It's after he just witnessed this unbelievable thing, and then he decrees it, and then then there's the other time that he does so as well after the grass.
Yeah, we're gonna have a slide on that. Did Nebuchadnezzar? You kind of tipped your hand already, but we're gonna ask the rest of the crew here at class tonight. Does Nebuchadnezzar have saving faith in this in Jehovah here? So based upon what he says. So, but thank you for that addition. That's absolutely correct. I could have pulled the next 3 verses and gone into chapter 4, but I didn't. So. But we'll hold that thought. All right, so list at least 5 miracles recorded so far in Daniel chapter 3 that you have heard about. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you 60 seconds to be able to do it. And hopefully you'll have some nice background music that won't be too distracting for you to be able to do that. So 5 miracles recorded in Daniel chapter 3 from what we've looked at. Here you go. Our time is up. All right. So, obviously I did not, but there we go. All right. So, what have you come up with as far as 5 miracles that you can find in Daniel chapter 3 so far? Anyone? You can just start throwing.
Judy here.
Hi, Judy.
Their body not damaged, their hair was not singed, their robe not scorched, and there was no smell of fire. I only got 4.
That's pretty darn good, because the 5th one, or maybe we could combine a couple of yours into one. I think it's going to be combined on one of the slides, but that's pretty darn good. Did anybody come up with anything more? All right.
Well, there were 4 men.
Yeah, go ahead, Karen.
There were 4 men,
Mm-hmm.
and they were all, and the 3 that had been thrown in tied, of all the 4, they were free, they were untied, and they were walking around.
Yeah. The only thing that Nebuchadnezzar's fire destroyed was his mightiest soldiers and the ropes that were binding the 3 men together. Ultimately, it did not have the purpose of ending their lives at all, right? And so death was not the outcome of this fire. And quite honestly, the only thing that death can now destroy for us is the bond that tethers us to this world, which we're obviously not real upset about letting that bond go. Because, I mean, why not? I mean, I guess maybe the analogy limps, but just as a baker is not afraid to put his hands into the oven to get the finished loaves of bread out, we do not need to be, I'm not even going to qualify it with really, we do not need to be afraid of death, because we're not going to be burned by death, because we have Christ's righteousness, which protects us. So death is just going to be a transition. It's going to be like walking through a door. The Bible describes it as a sleep, because you wake up again, right, from sleep. So we don't need to be fearing death because of Christ's righteousness of what he has done for us. But I kind of jumped in there. Sorry. Maybe I stole someone else's thunder about. Did you want to add to any miracles that you recognized here? At least 5 of them. Okay, then I'm going to just kind of run us through these real quickly. And what we've got here in the first one is the 3 men survive a fire, which is about as possible as Matthew's Gospel 14 on Sunday, where Jesus walks on water. That is an impossibility, and yet the Bible tells us that Jesus loves to do impossible things. So he walked on water, and these 3 men survived the fire. The second one that I came up with is they come out of the furnace, out of the fire, not even smelling like smoke, which is absolutely amazing. And I guess the correlation, maybe it limps a little bit, maybe I'm straining a little bit, stretching this too much, but the correlation for us is when Jesus raises us from dead, there's not going to be a whiff of death on us either, which is absolutely amazing when you stop to think about it. So the third thing that I came up with was the 4th man who looks like a son of the gods. And every confessional Lutheran that I have been able to find, and every seminary prophet, Wisconsin Lutheran Seminary and Concordia in St. Louis, which would be Missouri Synod, and the LCC Seminary, they all recognize this to be the pre-incarnate Christ, the angel of the Lord, that it is Jesus. Does the Bible say that this is the angel of the Lord? No, it doesn't describe him as the angel of the Lord, but we take it to be that. So you can, this is an open question. With open questions, when the Bible neither speaks positively or negatively or doesn't say anything at all, it's an open question, and you can argue with me from now until the cows come home, and we can both walk away with our own opinions on this without our faith being altered one way or the other. But since it has such a resounding history of being identified, this fourth man being identified as the angel of the Lord, the pre-incarnate Christ, we're going to go with that. So, all right. So moving on to another miracle, the extraordinary faith of three young men who were still in their maybe 20s, even if they're in their late 20s. The spiritual maturity that these guys showed is absolutely incredible. I know people that are twice or three times at their age that I'm not sure that they would not have bowed down and just told themselves, well, God knows what's in my heart. It's important for me to stay alive in this situation. So the faith of these men is absolutely something else. And then I think we got one more. The fact that God does not strike Nebuchadnezzar dead at some point shortly after these guys come out of the fire. And this is the second time now that he has seen, that experienced firsthand the hand of the Lord in his life and in his realm. But God is a God of patience, and he's a God of mercy. And he is being patient with Nebuchadnezzar as he has been patient with us when we've done boneheaded things. So
Could I interrupt something, Pastor?
please go ahead, Mike.
Maybe I'll just rephrase that. Instead of God doesn't strike down Nebuchadnezzar, God uses the most unprofessed man in the assembly to profess himself. I think that's more of why he spares Nebuchadnezzar. He uses Nebuchadnezzar, the last man on earth, to proclaim the truth of God.
Yeah.
I think that's really more the miracle, if you will. But
Yeah. So this is the place where I'm going to ask you. I didn't create a separate slide on it. Mike has tipped his hand on whether he feels Nebuchadnezzar has saving faith here. But did Nebuchadnezzar now acknowledge faith in the one true God? And granted, we only went up to verse 30. But you can go ahead and read, the first three verses of chapter 4 and see if that influences your opinion any way, or shape, or form. It really boils down to starting at verse 28. Nebuchadnezzar said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and saved his servants, who trusted in God and ignored the king's command." All accolades on Nebuchadnezzar's part for the three amigos. They gave up their bodies and did not pay homage or worship any god except their God. So again, kudos from Nebuchadnezzar. Verse 29, "So I have issued an order that every people, nation, and language that speaks any blasphemy against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut to pieces, and his house should be turned into a pile of rubble, because there is no other God who is able to save like this." Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Now, the first three verses of chapter 4 from King Nebuchadnezzar, "To all peoples, nations, and languages that dwell on the entire earth, may your peace and prosperity increase. It seemed good to me to declare the signs and wonders that the Most High God did for me. How great are his signs, how mighty are his wonders. His kingdom is an eternal kingdom, and his dominion extends from generation to generation." So, does this sound like a confession of faith to you? And why, or why not?
Yeah, Dalton here.
Yes, Dalton.
What he is professing is that there are still other gods, and while none of them are as powerful that could have done this particular miracle, he still believes that there are other gods. So this is not a profession of faith in the one true God. This is merely the admission that there is another God who is possibly more powerful than some of the gods that he worships.
Yeah. Who else wants to kick in here with their thoughts on this? Do you think this was a confession of faith by Nebuchadnezzar's mouth and lips and heart?
I wouldn't call it a profession of faith as much as he's impressed. The other gods, maybe they do stuff, maybe they don't. He's not so sure about that. He professes them. He doesn't want to offend other gods, but he hasn't seen other gods do stuff like that. That's
Yeah.
impressive to him. And I would say it is a true profession of faith, just the same way Jesus professed, the seed sower parable. Those people have real faith. They have a seed of faith, but like the seed that falls on the rocks or that has shallow roots, it fades quickly. His fades quickly. So it's a true profession of faith. God made this man bow in a way to the fact that there is a real God and you need to listen. But then that's why, for me, when I read it, at least if I'm following the Hebrew read of it, then the next chapter kind of begins with Nebuchadnezzar. If you couple those with the first one, then it's kind of him forgetting about that God again and sort of remembering that he's sort of the highest, mightiest person. And then we go into this routine again where he is then once again reminded who God is, and don't forget it. So I would say it's a real profession of faith in a sense. He's acknowledging it, but at the same time, it fades quickly.
Yeah, I was with you. I'm with Dalton on his explanation, Mike, and I was with you on the first half of your explanation until you switched over to saying he does have some form of, even if it's a baby faith or a fleeting baby faith at best. I'm just not convinced that he has any faith in the one true God at all. I'm with you guys when you both are saying he is acknowledging the fact that he has never, ever experienced any God like this in the entire pantheon of gods that he has in his nation. I have no doubt that he's acknowledging that. But verse 29 is, in spite of him making the decree in the first part of chapter 4, which we're not getting to in this Bible study, even his statement, if we go with what he says in verse 29, so I have issued an order that every people, nation, and language that speaks any blasphemy against the God of the three amigos should be cut to pieces, and his house should be turned into a pile of rubble, because there is no other God who is able to save like this. I'm very much of the same mind as Professor John Jeske in his commentary when he said, basically, Nebuchadnezzar is, I should have pulled the whole excerpt out. That's what I really should have done, but I did not. So you have to live with my abbreviated response. He's basically saying, don't insult that God. We wouldn't want to see him use his power against us and our nation. Jeske basically says that's not what the Bible calls faith. It's as simple as that. Nothing that Nebuchadnezzar has said here or even in his decree would give me any indication that this man has any acknowledgement of this God other than the fact that he's awesome. But he's not putting his faith and his trust in him. So
I think faith is not really the word I'd be comfortable calling it. I think just he is acknowledging God, but I wouldn't go so far as to call it faith the way we would consider faith.
yeah.
Faith has a whole lot of other connotation to it. So I don't think I would be comfortable going that far, but I do believe he is truly acknowledging God. There is a God. This is real. That just happened. That shouldn't have happened. And we're not going to take that God off, if you will.
Yeah.
But he is also not lowering himself either. He is still maintaining his position of maybe equality or par with God. So, I mean, I think God has forced this man to reveal, yes, there is a God, but at the same time, this guy is still Nebuchadnezzar.
This guy is so like Pharaoh in so many ways. Pharaoh gets brought right up to the very edge that he realizes that he can't outdo what the Yahweh God can do. And he's almost there to being brought to repentance. And then his ego just kicks right in, and he gets his backbone up against God, and he just lashes out against the Israelite people again. Nebuchadnezzar is just like a hair's breadth away of being brought to repentance and saving faith in this one true God. And he doesn't. He's so like Pharaoh. It's just incredible. It's just like incredible. So anyway, I said at the beginning of the Bible class that I was not happy with the standard of quality of some of the graphics. This is one of them. So I want to quickly just get this picture off my screen and off of yours. There we go. All right. Now, question 7. By ordering the furnace to be made 7 times hotter than it already was, Nebuchadnezzar only succeeded in killing his own men and proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that the 3 amigos, God, could save them from the king's hand. Give at least 3 more examples, past or present, when God gained glory through his enemies. And I am going to give you 60 seconds for this, and hopefully this time I actually timed the music properly. So the question is, think of at least 3 more examples from history when God gained glory through his enemies. There's more than 3, so you should be able to do it. Go ahead. All right, there we go. Okay, so what did you come up with? What examples did you come up with where God gained glory through his enemies?
The crucifixion.
Crucifixion is definitely one. Yep, thank you, Karen.
Well, there's the Exodus. We can't miss that one.
No, the Exodus is a good one. I didn't even put that down, Mike. That's an excellent one.
I also like the one where the Philistines capture the ark and they can't wait to get rid of it.
yeah, that's a good one too. I didn't think of that one. That's good too. Yeah. Well, one of the characters, does anyone else want to kick in, unmute and add to the list?
Elijah and the prophets of Baal.
Yeah, Elijah and the prophets of Baal is another good one that I could have added in here. Really good. One of them that we're going to be taking a look at, I think, in this series of Bold, Strong, and Courageous is the story of Esther. And it's a book that has a lot of history behind it as to wondering why in all the world it's even in the Bible, especially the Old Testament Bible, because it never once mentions the word God. But it's the story of Esther and Haman, her arch enemy, and Haman is basically out to kill the Jews. And he finds out that she is Jewish, and the king has taken her as his bride, one of his wives, the head wife, I believe. And God is, in the end, glorified through this action of Esther, and I'm hoping that we can get to actually studying her along. I think her and maybe pairing her with one other would be a good lesson for one night. Not a lot of material for a whole 55 minutes of Esther, but you never know what I find. The other one is obviously what Karen mentioned, is Jesus' death on the cross. God has definitely brought glory through the hands of his enemies in the crucifixion of his son for the payment of our sins. Right there up near the top of the list. The other one that we don't often think of would be the tomb time, where the chief priests wanted the tomb sealed and have a guard posted so that Jesus' disciples wouldn't come and steal the body, and then they would go around and say that he had risen from the dead, and he ends up rising from the dead and escaping the tomb anyway. So this is one that I think you could put on your list. Another one would be more from the early church and early first 300 years of the church's history, persecution during the first 300 years until Constantine turned it into not only a legal religion, but his religion, the religion of the Roman Empire. Christians were persecuted regularly. They were considered a cult. They were not even under the protection of the legal religion of Judaism, being seen as an offshoot cult of Judaism, not an offshoot religion. But because of this persecution of the early church, believers were scattered all over the world trying to escape it. And they ended up bringing the word with them wherever they went. So in spite of the opposition of sinful men, the church continued to prosper. Another one that, since we're not real big on our Lutheran church history, let alone sometimes our Bible church history, there was persecution of confessional Lutherans, of all things, in Germany in the 1800s. And many of them fled their homeland, the homeland of Luther, of all things. And they came to the United States, and they brought this confessional Lutheran faith with them. When they first settled in America, Pennsylvania seemed to be the place where they liked to. That was kind of on the western fringe of civilization at the time. It was still pretty wild beyond Pennsylvania, west of Pennsylvania for quite a while afterwards. But it was similar territory and similar farming setting for that they were used to in Pennsylvania. So to this day, the headquarters of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America is still is in Philadelphia. So I think I have one more for you. No, I guess not. That was maybe 5 that would examples where God was glorified through his enemies. Just a couple of quotes. Steinman's quote is first. God's deliverance of the three amigos places an exclamation point on a theme that runs throughout every section of Daniel. The one true God alone is omnipotent, and he uses his might to accomplish salvation for the benefit of his people. And that's how God always uses his power. It's also ultimately for the glory of his name, but the rescuing of his people as well. As the last chapter of world history is being written, John Jeske writes, "What a comforting truth the history of the fiery furnace brings to God's children. It assures us that no world power, no matter how strong, can endanger the safety of God's people. The Savior has said to his disciples, 'Do not be afraid of those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather, be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell.'" So, where did these three amigos, and this is supposed to be the conclusion slide, but I've got a little bit more that I just added on at the tail end of last week. But where did these three amigos find their fireproof faith? Where did it come from? If you think back to where we started, you should be able to answer that question. Their number one priority was to glorify God or to save their own skins. And when you're saving your own skin, there's usually some way, shape, or form, nuance of ego involved in that decision making, isn't it? Yeah. And for them, their ego, their self-preservation was pushed down, and the glory of God was pushed up by what they did and what they didn't do, and by the confession of their faith. So just a couple of verses there that just kind of wrap this thing up. What good will it be for a man if he gains the whole world yet forfeits his soul? Do not be afraid of those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Rather, be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell. And I don't put that in there because I don't want to infer that the three amigos refused to bend their knee to the idol out of fear of God and retribution from God. But there is this element in here of standing up for the glory of the Lord. So, and then Psalm 63 had, because your love is better than life, my lips will glorify you. And I think that's really a fitting conclusion to the Bible study on Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But where I wanted to take this, and then if you have any comments or questions, as I was kind of wrapping this up last week after slide 19, and I was thinking about this, and I was starting to get ready for some sermon writing for Wednesday night and for Sunday. Matthew 14, Jesus walking out on the Sea of Galilee to find his disciples and let Peter walk on water. If we go full circle, what is at the heart and core of fear? We've looked at this a couple of times. We've looked at it with Psalm 23. We're now kind of repackaging the whole concept with bold, strong, courageous by looking at bold, strong, courageous examples of people and their lives and their confessions in the Bible. But how often are you actually going to be asked to bow your knee to an idol 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide and being threatened to be thrown into a furnace if you don't do it? But every day, you're being tempted in some one way, shape, or form to bend your knee to some form of idol, right? Which is a related thought here. But where I'm going with this one is not so much do I want to flesh out tonight the idea of not bending your knee to an idol, but the idea of where does this boldness come from? Where does this courage and strength come from? So if fear is anxiety or increased blood pressure over the unknown, because that's really what fear is. We human beings cannot see into the future. Only God can. And the unknown makes us afraid, right? In Sunday's sermon or Wednesday's sermon, I used the term uncharted waters. We don't like uncharted waters. It's the rare human being that is such an adventurer. And when you read the stories of the adventurers, even the adventurers in their autobiographies will sometimes confess that their heart was skipping a beat or six because of the fear of the unknown. So here's kind of how I want to pursue this fear of the unknown, and how do we get a grip on that, spiritually speaking, and then so that it has positive fallout physically for us. I've tried to crack this nut with you a couple of different ways, a couple of different times, but here's one more way that maybe this one will help or stick. So let's first look at the fruits of the Spirit, Isaiah 11, verse 2. And the fruits of the Spirit are actually for the Messiah. They're not for us directly. This is a description of the fruits of the Spirit for the Messiah. So the Lord will rest upon him what? Wisdom, the ability to look into the very essence of things, right? That's the difference between wisdom and knowledge. Everyone has knowledge. It's how you use that knowledge. That's wisdom, okay? The Messiah is going to have the fruit of the Spirit called understanding, the ability to distinguish and perceive differences in things. Right? Discernment maybe would be a finer word to use with that definition there. These two right here give the Messiah insight into all the things that his people will need to know and understand, including the depths of God's nature and his grace. Okay, so he's got that packaged into him now. Now let's keep going with some more fruits of the Spirit from Isaiah 11. He's going to have this gift of counsel. Counsel knows what his people need and it gives them advice. good advice, good solid counsel, God-pleasing counsel. His word is the advice that he gives to his people, including his plan for our redemption. There's the gift that he's going to have of power. Now, he's God, so obviously he's going to have power, but he has the power to defend his people and to carry out his plan. It's one thing to be able to say, I'm going to protect you no matter what, Karen Goetzinger, but I need to have the power behind that statement in order to back it up. And my power only goes so far, right? So then we're going to take a look at the fifth gift that the Messiah was given, this gift of knowledge. And in the phrase, it's the knowledge of the Lord. I didn't put the knowledge in the fruit graphic, but it's the knowledge of the Lord. It implies an acquaintance with the Lord Jehovah, the God of free and faithful grace, and his covenant of grace that he has made with the human race. It also implies a concern for what the Lord wants. And you see that all the time with Jesus. My work is to do the Father's will. My joy and love is to do the Father's will. And then fear of the Lord. Which is a reverent respect for the Lord that submits to his will. Now, these are certainly fruits and gifts that a human being can have, but follow my train of thought here. These are fruits of the Spirit that were given specifically to the Messiah, okay? Now, these are gifts or fruits that are all outward looking and they're outward serving. They come from a place of selfless confidence. And you might be saying to yourself, yeah, well, that's easy to say since he's God. I mean, you can't win against God. So of course he's going to have this confidence, this boldness, strength, and courage. Yeah, that's true. So where do you get confidence? Where do you get boldness, strength, and courage? Where does that come from? It comes primarily from the fruit of one more thing. It comes from knowledge. You have to have the knowledge. But where does knowledge come from that feeds the confidence, the knowledge that feeds the boldness, the knowledge that feeds the strength and courage? It comes from experience. For human beings, the Messiah is going to experience all these things. Now, he's God, so he's above most of this process, but he still has a human nature, right? Which is in communication. It's kind of short-circuiting for him, the learning process, for his human nature, the learning process. Unlike for us, we go from experience to knowledge, and that knowledge then gives us confidence or boldness or strength or courage. But if you haven't had that experience, how are you going to have boldness or confidence or courage against a fearful situation like COVID-19? Now, maybe by now you've just learned to live with it, but there's going to be another pandemic that will be worse. Something is going to get worse. This world is devolving. It's not evolving. Okay? All right. Let me carry this thought through here. And this is a line, Karen's going to recognize it. This is a line that I have basically lifted. I've stolen it from Letters to the Exiles, the 6-part video. And at the end, the conclusion is just brilliant, the way they pull this thing together. But they say the church is God's gift for the life of the world. My Redeemer lives and gives. That's not from the video series, but the church is God's gift for the life of the world. So there are those 6 gifts of the Spirit sitting before you that have been given to the Messiah. And the Messiah, the Redeemer, he lives and he gives. So how is he going to take these fruits of his Spirit and transfer them to us? And what does that have to do with fear? Well, I'm going to contend, if you'll bear with me, here are the fruits of the Spirit from Galatians, okay? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control, all right? There are the 9 fruits of the Spirit of a Christian as a result of the Messiah sharing his gifts of the Spirit with us. Okay? Bear with me. Here we go. These two are all outward looking and outward serving. These gifts as well that have been given to us, they come from a place of selflessness, selfless confidence, boldness, strength, and courage. When you step out and you extend kindness to somebody, you're putting yourself on the line. When you show goodness to someone, you're putting yourself on the line, and that comes from a certain sense of confidence, right? You might be shrewd as a snake and innocent as a dove, like Jesus recommends that you be, but you're still putting yourself out there. There's a certain amount of risk to showing love to people, right? Now, this confidence is gained from knowledge. It's the same process for us. And where is this knowledge? This knowledge are those red fruits of the Spirit that feed our gifts, right? And again, for us, it all starts with experience. Now, this is where the hiccup comes for most of you tracking with me. And Mike, you're probably way ahead of me, and hopefully you are. But this is where you say to yourself, without experience, I fear. How can I have confidence in the face of the unknown future when I don't have any experience? Except this is the angle this time I'm taking to give you some gospel motivation and gospel strength. You do have this experience because your Lord has the experience. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future. That's your experience in the face of fear and the unknown. Your experience is in the solid promises of your God. Has he once ever gone back on his promise to you? Has he once ever let you down? Has he once ever turned his back on you? That's that constancy of your God's promises to you. That's your experience. So that experience can feed your knowledge that he is going to get me through this one way, shape, or form, right? Or take me out of it. And that knowledge then leads to your confidence and your boldness and your strength and how you're going to face this unknown thing. Do you know how this is going to turn out like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? You have no idea. You have no idea. But just like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you can say to yourself, the Lord is going to preserve me in this either way. And even if he doesn't, we will glorify his name by not bending our knee to this fear, right? That's the experience that you have, the solid promises of your God. Now, one more little piece of text here. I wrote for you the track record of no broken promises. From Numbers 23, God is not human that he should lie, not a human being that he should change his mind. Does he speak and then not act? Does he promise and not fulfill? So I maintain that that's maybe one other way that you could look at how you deal with being a courageous, bold, strong Christian in the face of adversity or in the face of fear. You may not know how this thing is going to turn out, just like the three amigos did not know how it turns out. But what they did express was a bold, strong belief and trust in this God to glorify his name, number one. But the fact that he had never once let them down, just as he has never once let you down. And that's the experience in the track record that feeds what we call strong faith. Yeah? So with that, I'm done. I have a whole 40 seconds left. But that's what I have for you on Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Do you have any questions, comments before we say ciao?
Can I make a comment?
Please do, Mike.
For me, I always try to when I'm talking about fear, I always start with distinguishing between a proper fear and an improper fear, or an ungodly fear or an unholy fear, because obviously you're meant to be afraid to put your hand in fire because you'll get burned, you'll get hurt. I don't believe Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were not afraid of fire. On the other hand, in that moment, there was something more important than the fire. So they had fear of fire, but they also had fear of God. Just like I also would say that Jesus was fearful about the suffering he was going to endure. He was not looking forward to that. He knew it was going to hurt. It was going to be awful. He knew what was going to happen. He knew how it was going to play out. He still didn't really want to go through with it. He did ask for his Father to take that cup of suffering from him, but not my will, your will be done. So that's the healthy fear in the sense of we don't subject ourselves just willy-nilly to these kinds of things. On the other hand, when there is a calling to step forward and not be afraid of what we have to go through, that's where, for me, fear becomes lack of faith in God, or lack of faith in God. I don't know how else to put it.
Right. Fear is just another way of saying doubt. And doubt is worry, doubt is anxiety, doubt is faithlessness. And faithlessness is sin, right? It's not a sin that can be, it's a sin that can be repented of. It's a sin that will be forgiven, right? But the truth of the matter is, I remember very early on coming to St. Paul, Pastor, you got to understand, we're just human. How can you say that doubt or faithlessness is sin? That's just the way we're wired as human beings. I said, that's because we're filled with sin. That's why we need a savior, right? I'm sorry if this hurts your feelings, but you did call me to tell you the truth about the human existence. And this, doubt and fear, they're essentially not trusting the promises of your God that he's got your back. It's as simple as that. That's the harsh way of saying it, right? And that's where pastors and fellow Christians need to step in and remind and say it from the compassionate gospel side, like you just did, that this is a God that's not going to forsake you or leave you, right? How many times does he have to tell you that? And sometimes, he allows, I did not pull it up. I'm going to use it as a quote, a Job passage in my sermon. But basically, you knew my ways, you put me to the test, and you brought me through like gold. That was Job after he went through his storm, right? And in the process, Job is another example of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now, did he get a little ticked off with God in the process of being turned from brass into gold? Absolutely. Or maybe even corroded tin into gold. Absolutely, he did. But in the end, he saw the wisdom of what God had allowed to come into his life.
And it might also add, too, that the absence of fear can also be sin, which is why Jesus did not throw himself off the temple to be saved, because that, too, that lack of fear, I'll prove God and I'm going to do this, that's tempting the Lord your God. That, too, becomes sin. So the absence of fear, or healthy or proper fear, is also sin, but obviously unhealthy fear is sin. So there's a fine line of where we're meant to be.
Yeah, and I think the easiest way to keep it straight when the $1 million question comes in your mind is, where does that fine line fall? The fine line falls is if you can pause, stop, and ask yourself the question, how is my response to this going to glorify God? Which kind of brings us full circle to where we started. Without micromanaging or microanalyzing, what kind of fear is this? And I'm not trashing what you just said, Mike. That's not what I'm trying to do. That's a good insight. I think you just need to ask yourself, how is my response to this going to glorify God? Because that's ultimately what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's lesson teaches us about how to face fear, or to state it positively, how to be courageous, bold, and strong. Yeah, so